Hello, everyone. I'm Erica Lukes, and this is Expanding Frontiers. Happy to be here with you on a very hot Friday all over the country. I want to thank all of the supporters of mine and Expanding Frontiers who get in chat every week, who help contribute to Expanding Frontiers research and also help keeping this show on the air. I've been doing this show for almost 10 years, and by my side there have been two people. Mario, who has been here, I pretty much every Friday, and also Peter Shelley, who is a wonderful support system. And so to have people like both of you here supporting the show has been very meaningful to me behind the scenes. And I also appreciate the people that send me messages and that are building a community that's based on factual information and making sure that people who are promoting disinformation, not only that, but very dangerous propaganda, are exposed. We've seen some very interesting things taking place in the news over the past week, and no doubt in the next week we will see some more characters and usual suspects pop up out of the woodwork. When I think about those types of people, I think about specifically Robert Bigelow, who, interestingly enough, is pretty much the money man behind a lot of political campaigns, specifically in Nevada, and most recently donating to Ron DeSantis, who conveniently has been in Salt Lake, probably meeting with Brandon Fugel. But anyway, that's another story. So I want to make sure that people understand, there are games afoot, there is misinformation, that there is a very real movement to thwart our democracy. This isn't a joke. This is tangible. On my Twitter, you can find me. I posted a video talking about specific cases where Russian propaganda influence campaigns touched elections, local communities, and we need to get it together and absolutely know that this is taking place in the UFO community. I also want to make a very strong statement about the old guard, people in the UFO community who have been here, people that have had access to these types of information, not only the Russian influence, but also influences by the Nazis, by neo-Nazis, by people who really don't intend to do the right thing, and they're not really looking for disclosure. And I want to just say that, people have a responsibility. When you are the keeper of information, you cannot pick and choose what information you give out. I really firmly believe as well that archives should not be stored in one location, especially when it comes to the UFO subject. They should be spread about to people that do not have an agenda, people that are not trying to promote UFOs, but are actually instead sharing history and teaching us important lessons that we need to know so we can make sure that we're not making the same mistakes. And in that, also by thwarting our democracy, because we are promoting Q propaganda. So anyway, I want to just say that it's very important to me, and I've seen it happen. We're seeing it happen right now, and we need to get it together. I want to say hello, Jim and Scott and Mystico and all of you. It's Simon. Hey guys, I need to go back. Daniel and Ken and Space Cow and Magnus. All of you guys, thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate your kind and thoughtful and intelligent communications in chat. I know that we're forming a community. We have formed a community over the years, and we are doing our best to make sure, like I said, good information is getting out. So anyway, you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to contribute to our nonprofit. It's tax deductible, and you can also go there to subscribe for the email list to get our blog and see the incredible work that we are doing. I look forward to doing much, much more. But on that note, I'm going to bring in my partner and a member of Expanding Frontiers. We've been doing wonderful work, Jack. So, first of all, thank you. Thanks for the work that you do. And thank you for communicating with me and giving me, just a wonderful sounding board for ideas when I get them, and for also when I give you bits of information. You're very, you get in and you do the FOIA requests, and together we are very, very formidable duo. And I'm excited that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you and be on the show. And I really appreciate all that you've contributed over, over a decade now of podcasts and video shows. And your message to open the show is important. It's very important to um, allow information to be obtained and studied. And some of the things we're going to talk about tonight relate to this exactly. I was noticing in some of the work that we've done on reviewing the NICAP files that a letter we'll be looking at later um, from then Director of Central Intelligence Roscoe Hillenkoetter to the administrator of a government agency, that this letter is significant to the NICAP story, as we'll study later. But my point right now is it was not released until 2003. And so the director of Central Intelligence, the future chairman of the board of NICAP, wrote this letter, and it was about obtaining classified information, as I say, plays into the NICAP story. But we have to keep our minds open to what new information might reveal about various circumstances, especially when we're studying history. Because
and excuse me for 1 second, but I just want to say hello to John Greenwald, who popped in to say hello. And we appreciate you popping in. And you can go to the Black Vault to check out his wonderful work with regard to, the man's done more FOIA requests. It's incredible. So thanks, John, for popping in. And I also want to say hi to Eventide, Lime Green, and there you are, Peter. Good to see you. And also Amy, I did not say hello to you, but give Dinah a big love for me, and thanks for being here, you guys. So anyway, Jack, continue, and I'm sorry to
that's okay. Thanks for taking a look around, John. Good to see you here. And speaking of someone that understands the ebb and flow of the Freedom of Information Act, we don't want to let our ideas get too set in stone about what one chain of events may have meant, or whether someone wore a black hat or a white hat, because the truth of the matter is, a lot of the times they probably changed them now and then over the course of their lifetimes. And more documents can become available as time goes on. And so your point is very well taken, Erica, that it's not up to any archivist or researcher to protect someone's reputation, or to keep a story intact, or to promote the history of an organization, as compared to allow fresh eyes to get at these documents and to use the documents to make new Freedom of Information Act requests, and let these fresh eyes get a shot at putting a story together that aren't hampered by 30, 40, 60 years of personal conditioning of what the story meant.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. That's a great point. And, I know from, our archiving, this has been my passion. As you know, Jack, you have helped me tremendously behind the scenes, and we'll be very excited to announce some things that are coming up. We'll make that announcement this week, as well as we'll be putting our archive online available for people to see. The Androffel archives are very important, and I just went through there today, and I called Jack and I said, you're not going to believe what I have found in Androffel's files. It's absolutely some of the most important things I think that I could find with regard to the UFO world. Dating back from the late 50s onward, communications between Barry Goldwater and people in high-ranking military capacities, and it's absolutely stunning. And Kehoe, the people that have formed organizations that are basically gathering information and doing what with it, we don't know. People who are specifically linked to intelligence operations, and people who are also linked to, some pretty subversive groups. And so this is such a wonderful thing for me, and I look forward to sharing this with you, because like Jack is mentioning, we need to look at this with fresh eyes. We need people to understand that the history of this isn't just about finding UFOs. This is about actually, making sure that we're not avoiding the same pitfalls that researchers have fallen into, or people that are just enjoying the topic have fallen into time and time again. And tonight, I actually want to just say, we're talking about, Jack and I agreed to show and highlight some cases of people that have been directly influenced in a very negative way by the UFO topic. I know for me personally, I have, and that is why I'm so passionate about doing this show and giving you information and digging into things. That is why Jack is so passionate as well, because of his own personal experiences and seeing how other people have been manipulated. And so we're going to talk about some great things tonight. Sorry, Jack, you were talking about NICAP. I just went off on a...
You're doing fine. I echo your interest and the direction very much. Like, one of the things I said to Erica during our phone call today was, we have all this material on Goldwater. We have all this material on Durant that wrote the Robertson panel report. Any one of these people, and dozens more. I mean, one could write an entire book about, much less do a YouTube show or write a 800-word blog post. And I mean, some of these files are hundreds and hundreds of pages of records we've obtained, and in a lot of cases, really the most rational thing to do is just make it available. Like John does at the Black Vault, just make it available, and at some point perhaps it will be meaningful to researchers, and you can always go back through it as time allows and things like that. But yeah, to touch on your other point, Erica, this topic is usually approached out of fun and intrigue. Oftentimes someone will have some type of personal experience that causes them to start interacting with members of the UFO subculture. Other times, I think perhaps in the last few years, it's been a little more common than it was in the last several years, to simply just start paying attention because it's in the news.
Right.
And people are interested and it seems fun. And I'm not sure it really ever can be. Those of us that stuck around it a long time just got particularly interested. I think about people that we've had the pleasure of interviewing and interacting with, some that are historians, some that are authors, and they just get interested in it and they stick with it. But I think to envision it as fun and entertaining tends to be a perspective of naivete to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, I have so many friends that like you mentioned, like hear the news about things, and then they're, oh, this is so cool, and then think about the possibilities, and of course, like the probability of there being life on other planets, that's just a given. But as we've studied all of this, the things that we've been presented with are actually no verifiable information, and a lot of games and a lot of grifting. And so, when you start looking at the lay of the land and your reality, it's like the reality changing moment. It's like, okay, wait a minute, this isn't the fun and games I thought it was. This isn't me just going to conferences and interviewing people or interacting with people. I now look at things from a perspective of, oh my gosh, I'm at a conference and there are leaders of a meeting that are telling people that they've been abducted, and they are, going to be, give forth information to the world that will change, the outcome of our future. And it's like, okay, it's a cult. In a lot of ways, it is, people really literally need to be deprogrammed from this. And I think that's, as we've talked about before, we're having Emma on the show, having specific, certain people like Simone Menendez, who we're going to talk about tonight, but to have people like that have been really adversely affected, this is something that needs to be really highlighted, because it's not okay to spend, it's not healthy to spend 24 hours a day on Twitter getting handled by Lou Elizondo, and then having a person like Lou Elizondo working with people behind the scenes to create a cult to go out there and do his dirty work. And so I'm just going to say that you don't have to necessarily agree with me. I've seen that, and that's unfortunate. Anytime somebody takes advantage of people that have been a service to our country, and takes advantage of people that are suffering physically and mentally, I think that's a shame. And so anyway, thank you for letting me say that.
Yeah, I think, and I'll segue us into some of the cases we're going to study with this remark. There's a perspective, UFO glasses, if you will, that people tend to come at this, and I really empathize with just wanting to know about flying saucers and aliens, and where are they from and what are they doing. But if we can, just for a few minutes, just for a couple hours, maybe tonight, just even for a fleeting glimpse, consider, what if someone took advantage of that enthusiasm? What might it look like? Why might they be doing it? And how many reports might be attributed to that? So, Simone Menendez in 1981 was a 21-year-old airman at Nellis Air Force Base of Area 51 fame. And she had earned a top secret clearance. She had excellent reports about her. She received accommodations or commendations of how well she performed. And Simone had an interest in UFOs before she ever got to Nellis Air Force Base. At home in Illinois, she had a sighting. She began interacting with the Mutual UFO Network and continued to keep some contacts. She indicated to me, when I was doing research for a book, The Graves Have Been Framed, that has an entire chapter dedicated to her case.
Great book.
Thank you. So she indicated that to me, and she's working at Nellis in the message center, 21 years old, top secret clearance. And one day at her apartment in October of 1981, a coworker that we used the pseudonym Airman Green came to her apartment with a message that he claimed he got at the center and that he kept. And
Jack, let me know, excuse me, but let me know when you want me to show the slides.
I will. I'll briefly tell the story, then we'll look through the slides. Thank you. Or I'll tell a summary. So Airman Green came to her apartment with a message that indicated that NORAD had been tracking objects from deep space that entered Earth atmosphere and purportedly hovered over Moscow for over an hour. This, of course, was significant momentarily, at least, to Simone. I hope that people can empathize with that. I mean, look what's going on in the news right now. I mean, people much older than 21 years old are at least outwardly putting career and country and life on the line to tell the world about UFOs. And she kept a copy of this message. It had some carbon copies. In January of 1982, Airman Green's former girlfriend, who was a civilian, came to Simone's apartment and informed her the message was fake and that Simone was to accompany her to the base immediately. That should raise a number of questions with listeners and viewers, and it did with Simone as well. But given the circumstances, she didn't think that was a good time to ask those questions and thought, I better just go to the base. Like, there's nothing good that can come out of not going to the base under these circumstances. That turned into several months of intensive interrogations with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, OSI, as well as the FBI, who by August of 1982 cleared Simone of any espionage or spying charges, but it was extremely emotionally grueling. I think it's safe to say changed her life, certainly changed the trajectory of her life. She lost her clearance and ended up moved to a base in Oklahoma where she worked in the laundry for a while. Interestingly, OSI continued to stay in touch with her. According to Simone, even tried to get her to re-enlist at the end of a second tour of service that she did, but she chose not to. And last communications I saw with Simone, she regretted really ever even going in the service, all things considered. It was a very disturbing chain of events for her. Now, what I think we can draw from this is I think it's extremely unlikely that Airman Green just thought this was funny. Author and researcher George Hansen thought that it was some type of counterintelligence operation to see who this might get passed with through MUFON and what the chain of the information may be. George even speculated that perhaps OSI stayed in touch with her to possibly use her in the future, as it seemed they may have used Airman Green. And as George speculated, they were using Richard Doty, and that the history itself then with Simone and Doty gave OSI plausible deniability about working with the individuals. But I think we should address some of the obvious concerns of how do we know this happened to Simone? So now let's go through the Mendez slides, please. Thank you. Barry Greenwood helped Simone obtain some medical records and records from OSI and the FBI. And this was a cable in January of 1982, an FBI cable, which was part of a larger set of records that indicated that Simone did indeed handle classified communications up to and including top secret, and that was part of her job. And the next one, please. And here we can see that even 2 months after the interrogations began, all the way into March, Simone was still getting exceptional job performance reviews, and even saying that other airmen would be wise to emulate her behavior, and that her performance contributed directly to the high efficiency of the telecommunications center there at Nellis. And next one. Thank you. And here we can see she gets her story further verified. This is part of a larger message that I clipped and is in some material that Barry Greenwood gave me in 2015 when I was working on the book, that Simone is aware was published, and Simone and Barry helped me with the chapter I was writing, that the message was marked as top secret, and the communication related to 3 UFOs over the Soviet Union. They allude to that the document was determined to be false, and the records go into much more detail about why that is, and make a very convincing case that experts that knew how to examine the messages pointed out numerous things that would indicate it was false. And then the last, well, I think I have one more for Mendez, don't I? Thank you. Yeah, this is again in 1984, long after she had been cleared, that the commander at AFOSI expressed appreciation for the fine job she was doing, and that her dedication was admirable. Thank you, Erica. So what we have here is a circumstance. What's different than a lot of what we see in other cases, and what we're seeing now in the news, is Simone came with a story, and her and Barry Greenwood got the documentation to back it up. Mm-hmm. And as George Hansen wrote in The Trickster and the Paranormal, OSI is highly implicated in this fiasco about why Airman Green, why Richard Doty, see, I thought it was relevant too in that context. This is the same era, 1981, the early 80s, that Doty from in Albuquerque at another Air Force base at Kirtland was passing around fraudulent documents showing them to Linda Moulton Howe, conspiring with Bill Moore to give them to Paul Benowitz, that assisted in Paul Benowitz's nervous breakdown. Simone was very adversely affected emotionally, career-wise, with documents, fraudulent UFO documents being passed around. And I found the circumstances very similar, frankly, to the extent that I tend to think Benowitz and Doty just were more famous than Green and the circumstances at Nellis.
And that is just, it's so heartbreaking. And I think it's interesting because people could look at this and say, well, that's just a conspiracy on a conspiracy, and yada, yada, yada. But it's like, there is substantial information that researchers have done requests for and can back up these stories. And again, unfortunately, it's like here we have somebody like Doty, who now and basically always has been put on a pedestal somebody that was known to work for Hal Puthoff. And yet why are we still holding these people who knowingly hurt other human beings on a platform? Why are we inviting them to conferences?
Excellent point. Yes, and we could further expand on considering that in light of so many other cases. I mean, we could just go down a list of people that said they know this happened, they know that happened, they saw this. There's gonna be a guy at a congressional hearing Wednesday talking about what people told him and what documentation he may or may not have seen. The Benowitz and the Mendez cases, I think, are worth considering in that context. That the motives of the intelligence agencies that they were associated with are extremely questionable, and I like to be as clear as possible. How do we know that a whistleblower today didn't just experience something similar to Simone Mendez, that just never ended up investigated that thoroughly by the FBI?
Well, this is going to be interesting to see what happens. And of course, we've got the usual suspects involved with, what's taking place on the 26th. And, again, to me, to sit back and watch what's happening on Twitter and to watch, some people in political power who are using this subject as a means to, like, literally, in my opinion, kind of thwart our democracy, literally. And people that don't know a thing about it, but are using it, like I've seen, with the beautiful, wonderful collection that I have here of historical UFO magazines and literature, to look back and see it's like, okay, don't trust the government, don't trust the FBI, don't trust, grab your guns, let's support the NRA, let's, all of this nonsense that we've been fed to create panic and to really kind of shine a light on a moment like this. This has all been in the making for a long, long time. And to see the people that are left at the wayside, who have had mental breakdowns, who have committed suicide, people that have, it's really profound. And I think that can't be understated. And so, I appreciate you talking about Simone. And I appreciate the work that you and Barry have done with regard to with what happened to her. And I also want to just kind of mention too, you look at people like Emma Woods, who we've had on the show before, and I would definitely recommend listening to that interview again. But you've got people that are in a position where they're being taken advantage of by the researcher who is allegedly helping them, people that that need professional help. I'm not saying that Emma did. I think Emma, it's just, but that was a situation that is really unacceptable. It's a situation that is unethical at the very, very least. And again, I want to shine a spotlight on people in the older guard who are still promoting and supporting somebody like that, David Jacobs specifically. So
I see Peter asked there if Simone asked why Airman Green would be bringing it to her. I wouldn't know the exact dialogue that happened between them. It was my interpretation that her involvement with MUFON and her interest in UFOs would have kind of been at least suggestive of why he would share it with her. To try to be as clear as possible, and I'll try to be concise. As I said, we need to kind of take the UFO glasses off and stop looking for Bob Lazar's hangar and consider for a moment the value to counter espionage operations, to try to find people that are using the topic as a means to extract classified information from young people with security clearance. And George Hansen suggested in his writing that he thought that's what the Simone Mendez case was indicative of, and I would tend to agree with that. There was no security concerns. No, about, I see the question about an NDA with Simone Mendez. The files were available through the Freedom of Information Act, and I mean, no, that would not be violating any security oath to discuss those things. So yeah, my point being, my overarching point being that UFOs can serve as an espionage or counterintelligence tool, and it's easy to not even consider that to be a possibility. And I can empathize that Simone was in that situation before it ever occurred to her it was even possible.
Absolutely. And I see some great, comments again, as always, in the chat. And it's nice to see Bill Pullen here, who's been on the show before. We need to get you back. And then Michael Redmond. And he just says that I want to be Jack Brewer when I grow up. So that's a nice
That's
comment.
Hilarious.
Yeah. And Fringe Quest, thanks for being a supporter of our work. We really appreciate that.
Thank you. Another thing I think we should point out here, and Peter, I think this might help with some of your questions as well. We're seeing this story through the OSI and FBI files of Simone Mendez that were released. There was more information withheld, and it's not an all-encompassing file on their investigation of what was going on, which is to say there would be another file on Airman Green, and another file possibly on his girlfriend, and another file called Codename something that we don't know the name of the operation to even request the records, which may be classified even if we did. So my point being, there's not just a narrative in Simone's file of here's what everybody did and why they did it. It's just like, on this date we interviewed Simone and here's what she told us, and that's what they'll give Simone. They don't give her explanations for who in the hell Airman Green's girlfriend was.
Right. And I just want to say, having been being somebody that actually has utilized the FOIA process on my own behalf, that has been quite interesting. And it's really important that people understand, like here for me, and I just want to kind of go off topic a little bit, but to understand the importance of utilizing grandma, of utilizing FOIA, specifically like where I'm involved with matters here for domestic abuse, and also matters with the military and domestic abuse. Using grandma and using FOIA are very important tools for me finding out information that will help me put the pieces together in my case. And so for you to utilize FOIA, in this regard to help people, that's important. But it's also, there's information that I can't get because another person is living. I mean, there are all sorts of things that take place when you're trying to get information. And so it's just putting pieces of a puzzle together, like you say, an interview here, this documentation here, and then you see where you can fall. But I think it's important to have access to those things and to get all the pieces and put them together.
Yes, absolutely. There's not, in the vast majority of cases, there's not a document somewhere that explains the plan from A to Z. There's just not. It, like you say, the best you can come up with is here's this person's investigation for security clearance. Here's when it happened. We can kind of guess it must have been for this event, since it happened like 90 days before it and things like that. But no, and it's all compartmentalized. Like the FBI will conduct security investigations, and that's one of the big values I found of FBI FOIA requests. I used to think, well, if the guy worked for the CIA, I have to FOIA the CIA, and then all they're going to give me is like a newspaper clipping here and there or something. But we can also FOIA former CIA employees, former NSA consultants, and things with the FBI as well. And sometimes that will provide a lot more information. And that kind of takes us to another case I came across in writing The Grays, and that was a Vincente de Paula. They called him Vinny de Paula. And he, in the 1980s, same time frame, he was the son of Cuban immigrants, came to America as a child. He was an immigrant himself, as I understand it. And according to Ron Regier's, a website maintained by Ron Regier of MUFON, and longtime UFO community member, Ron worked in defense with security clearance, as did Vinny, and that's how he knew Vinny and befriended him. And Vinny worked on classified satellite systems. And somewhere in the mid 1980s, Vinny sketched a drawing of an alien, and it got some attention around the UFO community. I couldn't locate an image of it for tonight's show. I have seen it, and it's similar to the Hill drawing and the Hill bust that Betty helped with or made. And this alien got some notoriety around MUFON and UFO circles, resulting in what Regier reported were 4 interrogations of Vinny with the then Defense Intelligence Services, I think it's called. Could we see the slide on de Paula at your convenience, please? But Vinny was, according to Ron Regier, these interrogations took place. You can see one reportedly went on for 28 hours, a total of 41 hours over 4 interrogations. And according to Ron Regier, he said that Vinny said that these interrogations with DIS were about the Defense Investigative Services, I think it's called, or was at that time, was about who told you about this alien, who's your contact, where are they? And Vinny reportedly refused to tell them anything about it. Thank you, Erica. That's good. And the public perception of Vinny got increasingly, we might say, conspiratorial. You aptly earlier, Erica, touched on it can be difficult at times to be respectful of people and give them the care they deserve and the respect they deserve while considering a UFO case and their perceptions of a UFO case. There were people that felt that Vinny died of cancer. And there were people that had concerns and expressed belief that that was induced by the federal government. Some people believed that his work on satellite systems may have had something to do with his having a better knowledge than the average person would of how extraterrestrial spacecraft were navigating our planet. And the general belief, to my understanding, was that the DIS wanted to know who saw this alien and wanted to be in touch with these people. I can respect people that may have believed that. I invite consideration of some alternative perspectives. It seems to me that something worth considering might be that the DIS, and we were just talking about how the FBI conducts security clearance. They investigate for security clearance. Some of the records we've posted at Expanding Frontiers, for instance, show how Robert Durant, that did the Robertson panel report, had been cleared when the FBI found out he had an uncle that had worked for TASS, the Russian news agency, for 20 years. And that sent Hoover into a tailspin about how the hell did we miss this? And he wanted, within 3 days without fail, no excuses, an update on the status of this guy's security and how big a risk is he. And they used contacts in the man's home, even. The uncle, they got it his maid, they got it the telephone operator in his town. They had a number of confidential informants, and that's what security services do. That's what the DIS did, was clear people for security clearance and maintain that level of security through ongoing investigations. For instance, we have discussed how Dr. Menzel, the Harvard astrophysicist, astronomer, how he was the object of surveillance his entire career because he was cleared for secure projects, and then the surveillance continued to make sure that he did not become a security risk. And that's what DIS did. And they were eventually absorbed into the DSS, which I think is Defense Security Service, maybe, if I remember right. But my point being, it seems a lot more, it seems possible to me that rather than the DIS was worried who's interacting with aliens and wanting to know, I think they may have wanted to know who the people are that are successfully gaining the confidence of people with security clearances working on these systems, operating, designing these systems, to the extent they will tell this security service to go to hell when they ask them who they are.
You know, and I'm sorry, but I think it's interesting because people that don't know about security clearances and some of the nuances that go into them, I mean, there are a multitude of people that have security clearances, and it's very compartmentalized. They're not shown, the keys to all the kingdoms for, various reasons. But, there are people that do have secret security clearances that doesn't give you carte blanche to everything. And I think in the UFO community, we do give, it's like somebody, he's got a secret clearance. Okay. Well, he could have a secret clearance on, helping the National Guard with COVID. That doesn't mean he's got a secret clearance on, A, B, C, and D and extraterrestrial, all of these things. And that also doesn't mean that there are, at the end of the day, like you mentioned in some of these cases where people are involved with satellites and that research, where people are checking in with neighbors. They've got people in the family that are reporting back, which is obviously for that particular thing that's incredibly important. But people that have secret clearances working on other projects don't have that oversight. And I think we've seen, news stories where people that are, have definitely breached that and stolen documents and are now going to prison for the rest of their lives because of that. So, there are lots of levels to security clearances. And it's not just because you have a security clearance doesn't mean that this is, you've got access to everything. So I just wanted to make that.
Yes, that's a very good point. In fact, it can certainly raise a red flag if somebody starts asking about stuff that's not part of their daily job. Like, what the hell does he need to know that for? What's he looking up that for? And some of those people you're talking about is John Greenwald got the documents over at the Black Vault that someone presumably in Mattis's office, if not Mattis, had penciled in, I'm paraphrasing, but is this a counterintelligence concern? Like, this is goofy ass behavior. What is this guy doing? And yeah, I think that when they're playing the UFO card, I think that gets heightened, because it's bad enough if people are gaining the confidence of security personnel that they're turning them on their employer. But if it's done via a UFO story, I think that I can envision that would heighten that concern even more, which kind of takes us to our next story.
And let me just really quick.
Sure, go ahead.
I just want to go, I just want to talk about this because I've got personal experience with this. Somebody who has a secret clearance who is promoting absolute garbage and who worked under a contract, $22 million contract. And yet, that security clearance hasn't been revoked, wasn't revoked. And then, it perhaps has been revoked now. But, there are some interesting instances where you could just draw that line there.
Yeah, there sure are. Yeah, that and what I was going to say about Bushman, that's somewhat on point with what you're saying. When guys start hanging around the water cooler saying this stuff should be public, that's really a bad scene for people with security clearance. There's it, like, that is the oath. When you took the security oath, it didn't say until you decide better, that you don't tell anybody. And if you really come upon something that you think should be published, or you really just can't handle the knowledge, you're not sure what to do about it, you'd like support with it, there are therapists. That's one way to go. There are attorneys that specialize in national security issues.
Not Daniel Sheen, just throwing that out
right.
there.
I am not referring to Daniel
I know.
Sheen.
I just wanted to throw that out there.
I know, I'm just wanting to make that clear as well. Um, there are law firms in DC that have portfolios of people they have successfully represented for publishing their books, for being whistleblowers, for keeping in getting them whistleblower status and protecting their rights. And there are things you can do other than quote unquote network or tell people that what you like you're saying that you just start telling these fantastic stories and tying it into your security clearance as if the
Right.
security clearance gives validity to the story.
Right. And thank you. That's just so, you put that so well. I mean, to have these fantastical stories and then to have, like with all the people that worked at Skinwalker Ranch, I mean, they had secret clearances. They worked at Nellis Air Force. They worked here and there and yada, yada, yada. And yet they are telling these, I mean, making extraordinary claims. It's at some point in time, somebody's got to look into that one, but.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you. So let's talk about the next example.
Mr. Bushman, I first heard of him around, I guess it was 2014 or so, when that's the guy, that's our man. He jumped out here and claimed to some guy on YouTube that interviewed him that he had top secret clearance at Lockheed Martin and that he had photos of aliens, and you can see him proudly showing one right there. And the Twitter account UFO of Interest has done some really good work on Boyd Bushman's photo portfolio that he shared. UFO of Interest has shown where these photos originally came from and why they're fraudulent or at least out of context, that they're not truly representative of fascinating UFOs. They're not representative of aliens that, as that photo we just looked at implies, that there's some live alien at Area 51, which was what Mr. Bushman claimed to believe. That alien in particular was pretty conclusively shown to be a Walmart figurine, which even raised for a while the idea that, well, maybe Walmart was helping with the disclosure process, which is difficult to even keep a straight face, as I say. Talk about you need to take off your alien colored glasses. So that seems most likely to you, huh?
Well, I mean,
and the thing that bothered me about this story, a lot of things, like, see, here's the chronological order. Just the YouTube video comes out, and here we are with, here's another old man saying what happened at Area 51. He's got photos. Photos are fake, we figure out in pretty short order. And so the thing Erica knows, one of my pet peeves is on both sides of the aisle, the believers are like, man, no aliens. And the skeptics are like, man, he's a crank. And they just move on. What else you got for us?
right.
Like the lions before the slaughter, what else can we sink our teeth into? And it really bugged me about that story that I thought, so is he just lying that he worked at Lockheed Martin? And some people accused him of it. They said he didn't show any credentials. And I thought, and if he did people just think it's funny to give him these photos? Like, he said that he knew a network and that these people all had seen things they thought should be declassified, and that the public should be aware, and that it was like, you're hearing all the rhetoric now, illegal, crimes against humanity, all of this rhetoric to be holding this information. Well, after Mr. Bushman died, John Greenwald got his requested records from the FBI in the event anything was there. And in fact, there were. And can we see Bushman 2? Mr. Bushman did indeed work at Lockheed Martin, and he had top secret clearance in what we're hearing now, these ever famous special access programs. And fascinatingly, the first sentence there shows us that it is Lockheed Martin's concern that there may be an ongoing attempt to elicit Lockheed Martin proprietary or U.S. government classified information from them via Lockheed Martin employee Boyd Bushman. And I highly recommend reading those files. They're fascinating. They give us a fascinating look into counter-espionage investigation by the FBI, and that Lockheed Martin investigators became so concerned that someone was trying to get information from Mr. Bushman that they contacted the FBI. And let's see that next slide when we can, please. But they, and so that network of people that Mr. Bushman kept talking about, this was a fax involved, which suggests that the FBI came to believe that Mr. Bushman was not acting with ill content, but that the people in his network were peculiar indeed. And that include people with interest in Russian arms activities, had a history of being involved in the Cold War, had a history of involvement in shady financial activities, and were of concern, were identified as persons of concern. Thank you. And so another thing that indicates to me is that there's just so many takeaways here that it looks really likely to me that the UFO topic was used to get Mr. Bushman's confidence and to make him, to undermine his employer, to make him feel as if the security clearance was some type of tyranny, and to get him just talking in a more confidential and trusted manner with this group, this network that he may have thought was about UFO disclosure, who was about eliciting proprietary and classified information. And interestingly, in these files as well, one of the topics that the FBI expressed concern that Bushman did not have any reason to be working on, but was showing interest in, was our old friend anti-gravity. That's like a buzzword, on the espionage circuit. And of course, that raises plenty of red flags with a Utah girl. I know, the anti-gravity story.
Yeah, Joe Firmage. Yeah, nothing.
Yeah. That who went through
folks.
$59 million on his anti-gravity venture that we don't know where that came from and where it went. So I think Mr. Bushman there is a pretty solidly documented story of using UFOs as an espionage tool. And again, like we were saying with Simone, see, we don't get a narrative like if we were reading it in a magazine. We don't get a file on what happened with that espionage investigation. We get a file that says Boyd Bushman on it, and we can see what happened in his part of it, where we would need to FOIA those other people and circumstances surrounding that date, espionage investigations at that facility, and so on and so forth to try to get more of the information.
And it's interesting because, you mentioned earlier, like skeptics and believers. And I think, I mean, I've been labeled a skeptic. I'm not a skeptic. I just am grounded. And as are you, I want tangible evidence. And so far, that remains to be seen. And I think the skeptics, sometimes the quote unquote skeptics, like you mentioned, just kind of totally blow by some of the things that are actually taking place. And that's where, when you're doing a FOIA request and you're looking at that larger piece of the puzzle, that's an important piece of the puzzle. And so I just, I think sometimes skeptics just don't see the forest through the trees. As do true believers. And that's why it's just important to look at all of this, because there is a bigger game. So
yeah, there can be a confirmation bias, a shading of the glasses in a number of ways. Like you had said earlier, you alluded to sometimes people just want a UFO story, and if there's no UFO in it, they just want saucers and aliens and all this, and you may miss a really big piece of the puzzle if you just plow through Bushman and DePaula and Mendez because there's not an anecdote about alien abduction in there somewhere.
right. And I want to just ask you really quick, and maybe we need to talk about this, sometime and then do another show on it. But you look at like people like, the Woods, I mean, that were involved with MUFON. And, they had security clearances. And so at what point, that would just be an interesting thing. Do you know anything about them?
No, I do not. Not off the top of my head. I do not. I do think that MUFON in particular, their dance with intelligence services is fascinating. If you'd like to talk about the Woods some, I welcome you to do so.
Now, I think that would be, really a great show talking about MUFON and the involvement, or the, that kind of flirting with the intelligence community, and then also promoting stories that aren't grounded in fact. Definitely do a fun special.
Over time, I got decreasingly interested in the saucer stories and more interested in the social aspects of this. And these were things I felt like I could sink my teeth into. Records on Mendez, records on Bushman. I tried to get records on DePaula. And as I said, DIS was absorbed into DSS, and they said they didn't have records from '86. But one of the things that aided that migration, or supported it, was the involvement of the intelligence community with these organizations. And one circumstance in particular that I was like, wow, they're like not even hiding this. I mean, there just has to be more IC involvement with MUFON here. And it turned out there was, the DIA and Bigelow. But I remember James Carrion writing a blog post about how when Bigelow came up with this idea that they would do this, the bass, and would collaborate with the star team, and they're gonna, do all this supposed great stuff, and angel donors gonna pay for it all. I remember Carry On did a blog post explaining that Bigelow said it wasn't his money and he would not tell the board where it was coming from. And John Schuessler was supposedly the only one on the MUFON board who was told who the actual donor was. Now, if that's not a big enough red flag, I remember James Carry On writing that it was during this same point, this same general time frame, if I recall correctly, that he was contacted to be interviewed for Schuessler to receive security clearance. And it's just like, how can this not be relevant to people? As you're saying, okay, you got one group of people that are saying, disclosure at all costs, show me the aliens. So they're almost a lost cause, just to really tell you what I honestly think, that they don't care. Okay, so Schuessler's in bed with whatever agency, I don't care. Is he going to come out with any information? And then the other side of that coin, the other extreme, can be just as bad, about just saying, oh, well, he's just a crank. He believes in all those UFO stories. And it just makes you, and I'm just like, am I taking crazy pills here? Like, the guy is getting checked for a security clearance that is the longtime MUFON founder and staple, while a boatload of money's coming in that nobody will say where it's coming from. And so, as you can imagine, not only was I not surprised, I expected for eventually somebody like the Defense Intelligence Agency to be outed as the source of the money that went through Bigelow as a conduit, a la 1950 CIA.
Yeah, the whole thing is so interesting, and I wanted to say hello to Keith Chester. Nice to see you, Keith. It's
Hello, Keith.
Really great. And I need to get you on the show sometime soon. So I'm putting that out there. And I also want to just say that Keith was actually the first person that donated to my archive. And so that was really, really amazing to receive, 2 huge boxes from Keith, and I just really appreciate that. And that, Keith, you're actually the person who really, really got me going on this, on the archiving. So thank you for inspiring me. That's amazing. So, and I also want to just say to Phil, I know that you're still involved with MUFON, and Phil's been on my show many times over the years, and I'm very, very sorry about your mother, and we need to catch up soon. But yeah, so the MUFON thing is very fascinating, and again, kind of a cover for a lot of different things that take place, and probably perhaps a little bit of grifting, and so it's just the whole thing is a very curious thing. And I want you to, because there was somebody that mentioned earlier, actually quite a while ago, that people don't know the difference between intelligence and counterintelligence. And so can you just clarify that for everyone that's listening?
My interpretation is, and I should start with, I do not work in the intelligence community. I never have. I don't have any clearance. I don't have any education in it. I'm just a guy with a laptop in Florida that got interested in this stuff and probably know more than the average person about how it works. I think I know a lot more than the average UFO person about how some of this stuff works. And compared to people that get up and have breakfast and go to work at Quantico, I don't know squat. So I just feel like I need to clarify that. I think an intelligence operation is an active effort to acquire information about various activities. Counterintelligence is an effort to protect that information and or give bad information to people conducting those intelligence operations or something to that effect.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate you educating people on that regard, and it is fascinating to read about that. I love it. I've gone down that area rabbit hole of study because it's very curious. And yes, Keith, yeah, I really appreciate you. And Shadowy Spectrums, Peter Shelley just mentioned that Elaine Douglas went down that rabbit hole and identified Bigelow as the source. And and I remember like trying to, as a Utah State Director for MUFON, that was one of my things. I reached out to the woman that came in, swooped in, and got the Elaine Douglas files. It's like sometimes they're birds of prey that come in when somebody has died and perhaps take advantage of their family members and get information, and then they're not willing to help other people like myself when I'm taking over an organization. I'm not only trying to learn so I can make Utah MUFON a better place to educate my field investigators, but to also understand some of the nuances that take place when you're dealing with Dugway Proving Ground, when you're dealing with Hill Air Force Base, when you're dealing with some of the things that could potentially cause interference. And so, yeah, Elaine did some great things. It's unfortunate at the end of the day that her files will never, there's a portion of files that have been made available by, I think, Isaac Coy, but there's a lot of things that she did that will never see the light of day, and that's unfortunate that takes place. But so is the crazy world of UFO archiving.
There it is.
Absolutely. So, Jack, what are you? I have to ask you because obviously we've got some big news that is coming out, and we've talked a little bit about this on the show tonight, but in the next week we're going to see people talking about UFOs, and we've had the list laid out of the usual suspects again that are going to be promoting UFOs. And so what are your thoughts on that? Because I think this is, again, really an important thing to talk about with regard to people that are steering a narrative that don't have actually an interest in the topic.
It's a complex situation. I think that there are foreign adversaries in intelligence services with interests in attacking the American intelligence community, bottlenecking their activities, handcuffing their operations, taking up their spokesperson's time and energy, using everything they can to maximize the possibility a mistake will be made, a slip of the tongue, an accidental release, a release of something that tells us close enough to what something else might indicate. And I think that there are global people with financial interests that are not particularly aligned with any intelligence agency or nation only to the extent that it will serve their objectives, which are probably financial most of the time. And I think that at times they have mutual interests, and I think that, make no mistake, there are Americans and American intelligence agencies that fall in these categories as well, and at times target other nations, and that will come by way of economic terrorism and war. It will come by way of physical confrontation, traditional warfare. It can come to disrupt the real estate markets. It can come to disrupt food chains. Um, and I think the UFO community is but one arm of that complex puzzle.
Absolutely. And I think, it's an important point, because you've seen over the years how the health and wellness communities, how, local moms for, freedom. I mean, really wonderful, just a great group of people that are trying to be politically motivated or trying to do something to, help other people, to create, health and wellness for themselves. And it's just like, people don't understand how all of these communities have been and can be targeted. And it seems like such a kind of a faraway thing that would never happen. Oh no, that would never happen. And I'm still amazed in the UFO community specifically that you hear people saying over and over again, and people that are old enough that should know better, that say, oh no, the CIA was never involved in this. There would be no way. No, sorry, these were never. Why would anybody want to look into the UFO topic? And I sit back and think, are you kidding? Like, why wouldn't you? I mean, this is national security. These are the secrets of other, governments. I mean, of course, this would be one of the first places I'd go. And if you want to manipulate communities, you would find people who are open to new ideas, the New Age community, spiritual enlightenment, things like that. And you would definitely want to integrate yourself and potentially sow discourse and promote propaganda. And so I don't understand, and this is exactly how QAnon, has gained such a foothold. And also I want to say too, as I've mentioned on many shows, the value of data and collecting people's personal information. The fact that MUFON sold their database not once, but twice, and to who, where did that information go, and what does that, tell about a person who was, putting in a UFO sighting, especially when MUFON investigators are not educated enough and they're putting in medications and different things like that. And then you also have the abduction studies, which I think is really fascinating, and the potential to manipulate people. And there's some serious, very serious consequences that go in with not understanding how these things can play into some bad things.
Yeah, and I think this segues us pretty nicely into my last series of slides here about NICAP. I'll just kind of explain it as we walk through them. So,
Okay.
if you would please. Yeah, so considering economic warfare and all, this is what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, that this is a 1949 letter I obtained from the CIA. And as you can see at the top there, was not released until 2003. It was approved for release. So that kind of might challenge us to change our mind about something that we thought we knew for 54 years or something. What we're looking at here is a letter you can see at the bottom right hand corner was attributed to Roscoe Hillenkoetter. At the time, he was the director of the CIA, and it is addressed to Mr. Hoffman of the Economic Cooperation Administration. That's the ECA. So kind of remember that, the Economic Cooperation Administration. And what Miss DCI Hillenkoetter is doing here was requesting that Hoffman up the level of intelligence that he was sharing with the CIA. And the letter establishes that the ECA was already providing intelligence, but Hillenkoetter wanted to up that from secret to top secret and basically get further in the loop and be made aware of everything the ECA was doing and working on and learning. And what the ECA would do was supposedly go to foreign countries and help them with projects that should help them economically. And perhaps they did some good work. I'd imagine they did. I'd imagine there were people involved with them that didn't know they were cover for a U.S. intelligence organization. But that pretty clearly establishes right there that the ECA was an asset of the CIA. So now if we could go to the next, thank you. Now here, and with the date handily right on top there, we can see in 1950, so just a few months after Hillenkoetter upped the mission and exchange with the ECA, a Baltimore firm was assisting the ECA. And this article explains that a group called Counsel Services Incorporated was working with the ECA and got contracted and would be going abroad. Specialists under contract had been working in China and were going to work in Europe. And the next slide, please. And this is during that same era. Another article I found where it explains that it gives us some names about counsel services, which include Mary Von King, who was a important person with counsel services, and she was giving statements to the newspaper on their behalf and explained that these specialists were contracted specifically for their work in China. And
wow,
that should be a pretty big red flag that counsel services was helping the ECA obtain economic information for the CIA. So now let's go to the next one. Now here we see the incorporators of the National Investigations Committee for Aerial Phenomena. And this happened in 1957 or late 1956, I meant to say. And this was T. Townsend Brown, who had an existing relationship with counsel services, and Mary Von King, as you can see there, was an incorporator of NICAP, and a man named Thomas O'Keefe, who was also an officer of counsel services. Further research indicated that Mr. O'Keefe was a State Department man. He worked for the State Department at one point, notably including Guatemala during the 1950s. But now the last slide, please. And this was a contract taken out with NICAP between NICAP and Council Services. This is part of a contract. It's a screenshot from a contract that they immediately wrote up after incorporating. And interestingly here, part of the stipulation of Council Services incorporating NICAP and managing the group was that about halfway through there, we can see that it says this contract will be renewable by the officers of the committee, and if additional consultants in related fields for regional directors may be retained as necessary to keep pace with expanding operations, and goes on to say that that work will be under the supervision of the senior officers of the firm, namely Mr. O'Keefe and Mary Von King. So I hope that that's clear, that Council Services that was contracted at one point with ECA, which was established as an asset of the CIA, worked with T. Townsend Brown and incorporated NICAP. And to be as clear as possible, I am entirely suggesting that NICAP was incorporated and was an interest of the American intelligence community. Yes, I am.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sitting here, like I mentioned earlier in the show, and I just have document after document, personal correspondence, with NICAP newsletters. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to watch, and I know that Anne Druffel, who was involved, with the Los Angeles subcommittee, there are people that get involved that have no clue what the leaders of the organization are doing or their affiliates. And so Phil's, made a comment in chat, I'm with NICAP and I must be the worst, paid spy. I think, there are a lot of people that it's you get in there, you're organizing skywatching groups, you get up and you look in the sky, and then you put this information into a database, and you're, all of us at some point in time are probably useful idiots. And I think that, and Phil, I'm not implying that you are, but I'm just saying that, there's a lot of busy work and a lot of things that have gone on. And but the people at the end of the day who started the organization, who ran the organization in the ground. I mean, these are people that all have very significant connections, and that shouldn't be overlooked or minimalized like it has been repeatedly.
Yeah, there's no denying, as far as the demise of the organization, that CIA employees and as we just demonstrated, people adjacent to the CIA were involved its whole lifespan in doing managerial and administrative work for the organization. It insults my intelligence to tell me that's coincidental. I would also say that it ties back into the espionage theme of the three cases we looked at earlier, that if we can remove the UFO glasses and think for a minute about what if my job was to find out who's trying to extract information, who's trying to get classified information, who's trying to pass it, and what those what those lines of communication are.
Absolutely.
I'll be brief. We should consider that Donald Kehoe was encouraging United States intelligence officers to leak information to him. If the FBI and the CIA and the powers that be did not take an interest in that, they were not doing their job.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can't state that. Don't mind me. It was bound to happen to knock something over. It wasn't.
You made it a long time.
And I know. I just that's been pretty good.
I have been balancing this without knocking it. I should drink it and stop trying to juggle it.
I know. I'm just the grand arm gestures, but I mean, it does, like you said, it does insult your intelligence to think that. Okay, I mean, why? When you look at all of this information, how can you tell me that this isn't something, that was, this was an important organization, not for the reasons for UFO disclosure. I think MUFON has probably been an important organization. It has nothing to do with UFOs. If anybody can actually point me to a case that NICAP investigated or that MUFON has investigated that actually has to do with extraterrestrials and that actually has grounded information, bring it on. Because so far, nobody has come out with a single case that convinces me, a single case that clearly convinces people that are working for NASA. And interestingly enough, what we've talked about for almost 2 hours now is about how the intelligence community and specific people that have government contracts can use the UFO topic for cover. And we sit back and we let it. And I think it's really critical right now. I've mentioned this multiple times that we pay attention to what's going on in politics specifically, and the way that this UFO topic is unfortunately being used to create kind of a I don't know what, a group of people that distrust the government and want to overthrow it. I don't know what else to say. I mean, there's so many areas here that have nothing to do with UFOs, and I think it's very imperative that we look at that and then go back and say, okay, this is, there's a good case here, but like I said, I haven't seen one. And I'm not a skeptic, so.
Yeah, you have to be wearing those UFO glasses to not see in a vast majority, if not all, of the reports one reads through, the cases one reads through, the anecdotes one hears, to not see more likely possibilities than something extraterrestrial or otherworldly or from some dimension that hasn't even been shown to exist. As Mick West aptly puts it, there's a certain percentage in the low information zone that you just don't have enough information to know what they are. I'm by no means opposed to people that are interested in mysteries to explore and investigate until their heart's content. We all know people that are convinced that they have experienced some type of otherworldly phenomena that may or may not, as Martin Cannon, aptly proposed once, that the abduction phenomenon and UFO reports may have nothing to do with one another. There's just a lot of possibilities there. And, maybe people do experience things that are yet to be better understood.
Absolutely. And I mean, and I've said this multiple times. I'll continue to say this. I've experienced things that I can't explain. The more I learn about things, the more I can find explanations. But to this day, there are things I can't explain. But I think the biggest thing for me is understanding that putting labels on things isn't the way to go. Putting trust into other people to tell me what I saw is not the way to go. And, you know, the fact that the extraterrestrial hypothesis was inserted into a narrative at a specific point of time in our history, it should be a red flag. And the fact that we have, you know, I mean, we're looking to people like, well, I mean, I'm not looking to people like George Knapp or Jeremy Corbell, but these are the people that are leaking secret documents that have this great footage and of these things that defy logic. And, you know, I mean, it's a load of crap. You know, it's absolute garbage. And I want to just kind of focus on this for 1 second. People that are leaking documents, that doesn't happen without consequences. So here we've got somebody like George Knapp, leak documents, Jeremy Corbell, I'm leaking documents. And guess what? If there was actually something to what they were leaking, you can bet that they would be in prison without a doubt. So we need to kind of get over some of that stuff. And then we've got the whistleblowers and David Grush and all of these things, and Fravor, and the, you know, like I said, the usual cast of suspects, and whether they're willing participants in this or whether they've been handled. Like, you know, I mean, that's obviously, unfortunately, something that happens, as we've demonstrated, as you've aptly demonstrated this evening. People that have been given information and, like, you know, Boyd Bushman told that they're, you know, here's this alien, and yes, you need to distrust why you've got the security oath, or distrust the people that you're working for, and there's a greater good involved. I mean, there's so many layers to this.
There are, and I grew up in the 70s. My senior members of my family had books on bookshelves like John Keel, Jacques Vallée. That's how I got introduced to the subject, for good or bad. I used to listen to late night radio. There was a countercultural element to doubting the rigors of science. There was an open-minded freedom to entertaining the idea of extrasensory perception and psychic phenomena and extraterrestrials. And that counterculture made its way to be an all-out attack on the scientific establishment and the American intelligence community. An argument could be made. It gets complex when the American intelligence community is involved in it themselves and doing things like we saw happen with OSI in the 1980s. But there is no getting around that relationship is there. Global intelligence agencies, global money markets do a dance with, as we've discussed, any number of industries. Certainly the UFO cottage industry is one of them. And it's difficult for that not to take the fun out of it when you're aware of it, because it's difficult to participate in it without either enabling it or becoming an activist against it.
And I want to just say that Drew Williamson, and hey, Drew, nice to see you, but he just said that you're talking about something that started with Charles Fort's ideas.
Maybe so. I'm sure mine are not altogether original by any means. I do not consider myself an accomplished Fortean. I have not read Fort, even, as a matter of fact. as I suggested, I had an interest in Keel, and Keel was very much about, or at least my emotional takeaway was that Keel was very much about these highbrow scientists that think they know everything. Well, what about this, by God? And he, run a dozen cases on you in a book that just seemed to be mind-boggling. And I don't think that's all bad. It certainly was entertaining. It was fun. I still think that whatever you attribute it to, the Mothman story is a fascinating chain of events. But it did just become an attack on institutions, and I'm careful that time to not just say American, because one of the things that I found interesting that Nick Redfern gave me a heads up to once upon a time, was a State Department cable that one of the main things Nick was interested in was where there's a story about a crash retrieval from the island Spitsbergen. Someone has written in, like, put a circle around it and written plant on the State Department message, indicating that either at state or NSA or somewhere since then that it was documented that this was a planted story. And that's certainly interesting, but in the context of this discussion, I wanted to point out that the larger part of this cable was about a State Department employee in Moscow translating a UFO article written by a Russian doctor and sending it to the State Department. And it was my interpretation that the purpose of this translation and bringing it to the attention of State Department back stateside was to keep them abreast of how Russia is processing this topic at that time. And I think it may have been the 1960s, or it was Cold War era. And I think that has been an ongoing thing, is my larger point here. I agree with you very much about that. That does not negate that some sightings are of interest, or that some people may experience really weird phenomena from time to time. But yes, as you aptly pointed out, we have considered some specific cases here tonight where we have the receipts of how the intelligence community was involved in manipulating these, and or trying to figure out what other intelligence community agency was manipulating them. And there's no getting around that has to be taken into account if we're going to deify these researchers and agencies. And back to your original point at the beginning of the show, try to create pasts that never were of how we should glorify these UFO organizations and researchers and obstruct the information that might say different.
Right. And I think that, that's a great kind of way to wrap up the show. I think, the obstruction of information is something that we've seen over and over in this subject. And we see this today in what's going on, trying to rewrite history, trying to, burn books, all of these things. I mean, it's when you take that information away from people, where you run into problems. And the UFO topic there's always been that level of obfuscation there. And that's why I just really am, with my archive, with the EFR archive. This is important, and it's important to understand the UFO topic with a broader lens, because in my opinion, like I said, I don't feel we have tangible evidence. I've had my experience. Other people have had very profound experiences. Is that extraterrestrial? Nobody has proven one way or another if it is. But the bigger picture is the way this topic is manipulated and has been. And if we push data into one place, the chance of all of these things taking place, getting put out for other people to learn, I mean, that's a great tool for people with money who want to steer a topic. That's a great tool for political movements to steer a topic. And that simply can't happen with regard to this. And again, I want to just hit this point home, which I usually do multiple times, but when you have the keepers of information and people who have an important part of history, and they're omitting that specifically with regard to not stressing the importance of Nazis that have bought and paid for NICAP email lists, not once but twice. When you have people who are white supremacists, when you have people that are involved and embedded in this community, and you don't think that's important to put forward, we're going to go about looking for UFOs because this, people being harassed, Jenny Randall's, people like this being harassed by this Nazi organization, that's not important. Well, guess again it is, and you totally slept on the job. And so, we have to get it together with regard to this. And I think Twitter is like a huge cesspool for all of this propaganda, for misinformation, for bullying, for neo-Nazi groups to thrive and survive and get a foothold. And it's just, I really firmly feel that like I said, we need to look at the UFO community historically and see what has gone on. And we're never going to make a difference if we actually care about studying something anomalous. We have to expose things that are not in the best interest of that topic, of the purity of exploring. And that's what I think you and I are trying to do, Jack, is making sure that we are exposing that and, letting other people know these are the pitfalls. Please don't think that you're going to go blindly into a Facebook or Twitter group, UFO Twitter, hashtag, thinking that this is, all love and light and fun and games, and this is about ET disclosure, because it's not. And so if you want to find that, and you really want to go out in the field, we're going to have, do some investigating. Paul Carr will be on in a couple weeks, and we can talk to him about good quality investigations with regard to that. We've got some great people coming up. Thanks to you, Jack. You've lined up some incredible guests. And next week, I'm so excited to talk to Chris, who is actually, he's an artist, but he is the curator of the Edgar Allan Poe Museum. And oh my gosh. And so tell us a little bit about Chris.
Chris Simpner is the curator at the Poe Museum in Richmond, Virginia. And yeah, he's an artist and he's a speaker. And I'm sure he'll just be fascinating. We've asked him to come and share anecdotes about Poe, about things that happen at the museum. They do things at the museum besides just tours and showing their archive of relics. They also do writing workshops, and I'm sure they study Poe's fascinating writing at length. And boy, Poe would have just loved the current dance between good and evil in the UFO landscape, wouldn't he? He would have written a million stories about this.
Yeah, I'm excited, and I think with Expanding Frontiers, I know that we're not only talking about the UFO topic, but we're looking into things in a broader perspective. We are digging into the misuse of taxpayer funding. Especially, you did great work with regard to Skinwalker Ranch and Phenomicon. Again, I encourage people to go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to not only pledge your financial support, which we need. We are right now just we're still at the point where we're paying to do this and get the nonprofit started and really going. And I want to thank Michael and some of the other people that are donating behind the scenes. We appreciate you guys, but we need more support. And we are, like I said, we're looking into environmental issues. We're looking into so many other things, and this is really exciting for me. And I look forward to working with you, Jack, on just solving a lot of problems and exposing things that need to be exposed and giving people a platform to share their stories, which I love doing. So.
Yes, thank you. And I very much enjoy working with you as well. And I would like to um, emphasize Erica's plea for your support. If you enjoy her show, if you enjoy reading the blog, if you find it meaningful and worthwhile to you, we would very much appreciate your support. You can go to our website, expandingfrontiers.org, and you can make a one-time donation. You can make a recurring donation. You can reach out to us individually if you would prefer to do something, make some type of gift another way. And I would also like to let folks know that one of the reasons that we incorporated a nonprofit was so that we could also seek grant funding from agencies that provide funds to nonprofit corporations that will not to for-profit or individuals. And so we have been pursuing that as well. And I just want to point that out to clarify that we do not expect for a handful of people to basically pay for our website and activities, FOIA activities forever. We so far have paid the majority of it ourselves. We very much appreciate those of you that are contributing. You're very important to us and we appreciate it. But we do have and are pursuing plans for other support as well. And if you appreciate our work, we very much appreciate it if you could express that through a financial gift occasionally. Thank
Absolutely. You. Thank you, Jack. I feel very confident that we're doing important work and we'll continue to do that. We've got a lot of things on our plate behind the scenes that we're looking into, a lot of FOIA requests that you've done. And I know that some of the stories that we've got coming out will be pretty important, very important, actually, in a lot of ways. And I'm so excited about this. So anyway, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, all of the people in chat. And one thing that you can do also, if you can't, and I understand finances are tight, I totally hear that. But if you can share information about our show and get that out to social media in different ways, Twitter, Facebook, make sure you're hitting and liking and subscribing to this and telling your friends. We need to get that support. It's really critical. Like I said, we've got a very small, I think we've done, Jack, considering we're doing what we're doing on a shoestring, the amount of the ripples that we're creating because of our work are very significant. I mean, we've been mentioned not only in Fox 13 locally, but also in two other sources. And so tell us a little bit about that. We got props from Stephen Greenstreet, New York Post. And so that was great. So
yeah, we did. Of course, Fox 13 with Nate Carlisle. He highlighted our work kind of on Skinwalker Ranch and public records on money being spent on Phenomicon and paid to Phenomicon speakers that were Skinwalker Ranch personnel out of county funds and county contracts with a consulting firm founded by Fugel and Winterton. That our work on that springboarded into a story for Nate Carlisle that ran on Fox 13, the Salt Lake affiliate, after the Super Bowl last year. And then, Steve Greenstreet over at the New York Post featured our work in one of his well-produced videos on his deep dive into Skinwalker Ranch that ruffled quite a few feathers. And it's really not that that's the measuring stick, but truth stands up to scrutiny and BS doesn't. And that's kind of what it comes down to. And then Art Levine published a story yesterday that probably a lot of viewers have seen making the rounds on social media. The Ship of Fools, what did he call it?
Spaceship of Spaceship of Fools, and this is Washington Spectator. And
yes,
so that's I love the picture, but this basically, let me just read the kind of the tagline here. Major U.S. media and congressional leadership swallow new unverified stories of alien visitations, allegation of fraud filed with the SEC about conspiracy promoting former DoD officials, Rocker Tom DeLong, and the company they fronted for peddling false UFO claims, growth in UFO cults and cult-like behavior, violence, and cyber stalking by UFO zealots that raise new concerns. So you can check that out, the Washington Spectator. That was Art Levine's story that hit yesterday. So I'm glad to see, and we also linked to Expanding Frontiers Research. So we are getting people looking at our work, and that's really important. So, and good people, like you're saying, we're not looking for, huge numbers. We're looking for people that are the right people that care about proper and good information. So,
and Mr. Levine linked to some work that we had done on obtaining records from the SEC pertaining to the stars, and that that particular record was a consumer wanting to know what could be done about the money they invested, and basically being told it was a gift, not an investment.
Good one.
But Mr. Levine's article is somewhat of a who's who in that whole chain of story. It's a long article. It's about a half-hour read, and it is a pretty unforgiving article. I'll just let people decide what it means to them, what they make of it.
Okay.
But we're glad to be linked and attributed, and we appreciate that. And we're glad, we're not surprised by any means, but we're glad that our work is being recognized across larger platforms, because it was our intent to do solid work that can be cited and is not just anecdotal stories, but documents and receipts.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for being here. And again, expandingfrontiersresearch.org is the place you can find us, subscribe to the email list, and get the latest on our blogs, and then show your support. I will be here next week with Chris from the Edgar Allan Poe Museum. That's going to be a fun show. And then the following week with Paul Carr and Marcia. So we've got some fun shows lined up. Thank you, guys. Stay cool and have a wonderful weekend. And we will catch you guys next Friday.